Guys, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Before we begin our show, I need you to do me two huge favors. First of all, give me a like button, a thumbs up, whatever. We got Hannah directing our show for the very first time today. She's going to do a great job. Let her know you're glad to have her here with us on DawgNation Daily. And the significant other in your life, make sure you say thank you to them. I'll tell you why throughout the course of our program. I was actually over the last couple of days having to take care of my kids. My wife's been out of town. Let me tell you something. I am so glad for that to be over and so glad to kind of focus back on what we do here every day on DawgNation Daily. In fact, fun show coming up today. David Green going to be here, Mike Johnson as well. We're glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Still a little more than a week away from the world's largest outdoor cocktail party with Georgia and Florida, but you're already starting to get some attention being paid to the game. Now, here on DawgNation Daily, we've been paying attention to this game for virtually a year now, but even outside the bubble of DawgNation, there is some attention starting to be paid to Georgia, Florida. There's some point spreads out there. You can kind of get a look ahead to what the online sports books, Las Vegas, is thinking about the game. I saw where at least at one spot, Georgia right now listed as a 13.5-point favorite over the Florida Gators. That's a real drastic change from where this line was in the summer when it was initially announced. If you'll remember, back during July here on DawgNation Daily, we talked about this. When the very first point spread was given on the Georgia-Florida game for this season, Florida was actually about a field goal favorite. So obviously because of the very drastic fortunes changing for these two teams on the field this year, you've got a big change in the point spread as well. Georgia listed as about a 2-touchdown favorite over the Gators. It'll probably change some moving into next week, but for now, that's kind of where things are. And what you sort of take to mean from that, and what you kind of take from that is that clearly going into this game, this is a game in which Florida probably needs some help from Georgia in order to stay close and have a chance to win. And help can come in a lot of different ways. Help could be a Jake Fromm turnover. Help could be a defensive performance where, some receivers kind of get open a little bit the way that it kind of unfolded against Missouri. You wouldn't expect that to happen against Florida's receivers, assuming that Tyree Cleveland's not 100% healthy. The Florida group's probably inferior to what Missouri had last week, but if Florida's going to stay close with Georgia, it probably needs a little bit of help. We take that from the 13.5-point spread that's kind of available to you there in Las Vegas. What we find out, though, here this week, though, is in terms of Georgia giving some help to Florida, one spot where that's apparently not going to come is on the injury front. Because when Kirby Smart updated those injuries yesterday, speaking to the media after practice on Tuesday, he kind of gave some good news here to Dog fans. Some of those big names who've been nursing some ailments, apparently Kirby Smart's not very concerned about them. Here's how he addressed that after practice yesterday.
I'm expecting everybody to be good. Terry practiced today. He was great. Trenton practiced today. He looked good. He's bouncing back. Expect him to be back. David Marshall did not practice today. Hope to get him back. Reggie Carr was out there today. Practiced good.
So that is Kirby Smart talking about a lot of names there. Trent Thompson, who did not play in the game against Missouri. And on Trent in particular, if you go back and look at what we said leading into the Missouri game, that there's a thought that, and I'm not telling you this as a trained medical professional or even as a trained football coach, just my guess, that Trent dealing with an injury moving into the game against about a 30-point underdog Missouri, moving into a bye week, gave Georgia the chance to kind of give him that rest, give him that chance to recuperate. Here we are moving in towards Florida, and Kirby Smart already feels good about him. That's a good signal that while you don't ever want one of your better defensive players dealing with an injury, maybe that injury for Thompson really did come at a pretty good time. The same thing for Terry Godwin here also, or I guess a slightly different scenario with Terry Godwin, but Godwin, a guy that when he left the game on Saturday, I think there was a lot of legitimate concern on the part of Georgia fans. There was the report that he had gone into the locker room and that maybe there was an online report that his family had been kind of called down into see him and take a look at that. He comes back on the field. Jeff Sentell on our Dixie Vodka postgame show talked about how gingerly Godwin was walking when he came back onto the field. I have to say, when I did the show with Jeff on Saturday night, talking about that Terry Godwin injury, I don't know that I necessarily felt like we'd be talking this soon about Godwin already kind of essentially on his way back as a full go for the game against Florida. But that's the update that you do get there from Kirby Smart. And then there's guys like David Marshall apparently didn't practice yesterday, but Kirby Smart certainly did not put him in a separate category of injury. he kind of lumped him in with the other guys who he expects to all be fine for the Florida game, even though Marshall didn't practice there yesterday. So, for me, this is good news. For me, this kind of points Georgia in the direction that needs to go against Florida. I mean, y'all know the situation here on DawgNation Daily. We've obviously talked about this Florida game for literally every day for the last 50 weeks. And as it gets closer and closer, I think the game starts to feel bigger and bigger. And for me, even though we initially framed this as the next step for Georgia to take towards potentially having a championship season, at least for now anyway, the game sort of feels like a season separate into itself. That Georgia's opportunity to own the East, be in Atlanta for the SEC championship game, and then whatever happens after that, that almost seems like a separate conversation for now. That almost seems like, I think for a lot of Georgia fans, especially the ones who are really plugged into what's going on here, the sort of after-the-fact championships, even though the Florida game is a springboard to some of that, sort of feels like a issue to worry about once the Florida game's over. For now, this is about, for fans anyway, getting revenge over the last few years, correcting this rivalry, getting it pointed back in the direction of the Georgia Bulldogs once again. And given that as the backdrop for the game, it was certainly nice to hear Kirby give some good injury news about some players that Georgia really needs when it heads to Jacksonville. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Whether you're watching us on Facebook Live, of course, we're on at Facebook Live every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook page. You can also interact with questions and comments there. We certainly appreciate you doing that. You can also hear us on the radio every day at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We love our friends in the Classic City. We love being on the radio there with them, and we're glad to have you join us on the radio here each and every day if you are, of course, in the Athens area. And if you want to listen to the audio version of the show but you don't live in Athens, how about the podcast at DawgNation.com, SoundCloud, iTunes. We'll try to make the podcast for you as easy as we can for you to find. We're glad you found it. And thanks so much for participating in our Gator Hater Countdown for each of the last, 365 days. We are now just 10 days away from the game that I believe matters for Georgia more than any other. Not because it's more important than winning the SEC or more important than anything else. It's just the next step towards that path. And it's an opportunity for Georgia fans to really feel good about a rivalry that I think is one of the special ones in college sports, but maybe Georgia hasn't done what it's supposed to do in recent years. We think that can change next Saturday, and that's why we count it down here with our Gator Hater Countdown on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, when you think about the Gator Hater Countdown, on day 0 of that Gator Hater Countdown, we will be in Jacksonville for our DawgNation invasion of Jacksonville. It's going to be a terrific tailgate. It's going to start at 10 a.m. on game day. Now, here's where it is. I know that some of you have had a lot of questions about where is this DawgNation tailgate going to be. So there's a big group in Jacksonville called Tailgaters Parking. They own a lot of the parking lots right there near the stadium. We're going to be at the touchdown lot. It's near Gate 6 off Bryan Street, starting at 10 a.m. that day. If you're over 21, we're going to have, or 21 or over, we're going to have a Dixie Vodka tasting bar set up for you that day. Jeff Sintel and I are going to be there. We'll watch all the early games on 4 TVs, and we have got a few hundred of these are brand new Gator Hater t-shirts. Now, a lot of you had tried to buy your Gator Hater t-shirt and you couldn't get in because we sold out of our final shipment of those. Well, if you could not get in on that, or if you want the red one, because that's what we're going to do. A lot of you said, hey, why don't you do the Gator Hater t-shirt in red? We are doing that, the brand new red Gator Hater t-shirt. It's our DawgNation Invasion special brought to you by our sponsors there that day. While supplies last, we're going to be able to give those away to you for free there in Jacksonville for our DawgNation Invasion. I really cannot wait for that. Of course, speaking of our sponsors, this DawgNation Invasion brought to you in part by R.S. Andrews. And, cold last night again at my house in the 40s in Georgia where I live, and many of you kind of experienced the same kind of thing. Makes you think about the cold weather season when these 40-degree temperatures at night kind of stay around for a while. You want your furnace to be working the way that it needs to. That's why you want to get the guaranteed $99 furnace tune-up from my friends at R.S. Andrews. Their clean screen, trained and timely techs will give your system a thorough check, and they'll make sure that it is working all winter long. So trust the ones that I trust, R.S. Andrews. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. They're the home of the guaranteed $99 furnace tune-up. Let me tell you one more thing here about the Florida game. Then I want to have some fun with some of y'all who've been sending in some Gator Hater stuff for us. We told you about the tailgate coming up next Saturday. Also, a little less than a week from now, coming up this upcoming Tuesday, we're going to be at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven for our DawgNation Invasion Big Game Preview. That night, 6 to 8 p.m., Marlowe's in Brookhaven. Jeff Sintel and I will be there. We're going to do a live broadcast. We'll do one of those special off-air conversations. We're going to have some stuff to give away hopefully there as well, including our friends from Marlowe's. If you come dressed up in your Georgia red and black, They're going to give you a free appetizer to go along with your entree. It's a really cool thing to do, and what better way to get ready for the cocktail party than having one of the craft cocktails there at Marlowe's. Great spot. 3575 Durden Drive in Atlanta, Marlowe's in Brookhaven for our Dog Nation Invasion big game preview, looking ahead to that upcoming Saturday. All right, before we hear more from Kirby Smart, this time on the Georgia offense, let me let you see a few of your fellow Georgia fans here, because one of the things we've been doing a lot on DawgNation Daily is, in preparation of the big one 2 Saturdays now against Florida, y'all know what a big Gator hater I am, but I wanted some of y'all to have a chance to kind of also show your own Gator hater credentials here. And I asked you to reach out to me on Twitter, at DawgNation Daily, and if you haven't done this yet, still love to hear from you. At DawgNation Daily on Twitter. You can reach out to me and you can either show me your DawgNation Daily Gator Hater t-shirt that you have. We'll put you to the front of the line if you've got one of those. Or if you've got your own inspired Gator Hater type stuff, we'll give you a chance to kind of show that stuff off as well. Just reach out to me on Twitter, at DawgNation Daily. We have a few of these that we're going to show you right now. Some of them I don't know that we can at least show you the full part of. Some of you really took this in kind of an interesting direction. But let me show you what some of the people have been sending to me on Twitter, at DawgNation Daily. This coming from our buddy Mad Dog here, who says, I set my DVR to record The Biggest Loser, but it keeps recording the Florida Gators games instead. That's a really funny little meme there from our buddy Mad Dog. Thanks for sending that in. I love Dub Mentality here, who's got his own kind of old school Gator Hater t-shirt. He says that he's looking to upgrade that to one of our brand new red ones for our Dog Nation Invasion in Jacksonville. And Dub, we'll try to save you one. Hope you can get there, and we'll try to give you one. Now, I guess this comes from a local artist who kind of put this together. Some folks shared this with us on Twitter of the Georgia Bulldog here taking out the trash with the Florida Gators, stuffing in the trash can. We've had some great folks kind of sharing those with us, and we certainly appreciate that. A few more of those things kind of coming in, and that's been kind of really cool to see from a terrific local artist here in the Georgia area. Then we've got some more of these we can show you here as well. How about John Christie, who shows you the Bulldog kind of doing his business here on a Florida sign, and it says, when you gotta go, you gotta go. And I realize if you're not watching in video, you can't see this, but you can check out the show on Facebook Live. You will be able to see this. Chris Landers has got a great flagpole. A lot of you put the flagpoles up for your tailgate. Well, he's got the Georgia flag flying, and underneath that, he's got a pair of what looks to be a Florida fan's jean shorts, also kind of flowing in the breeze here. Pretty funny stuff from him. I think we've got a couple more here. Mandy Edwards sends a picture of a Florida fan enjoying his jean shorts, unironically, by the way, rocking the jean shorts. Mandy, we appreciate that. Thanks, Mandy, for getting in on that. Sandy Clark's sent her own version of a Family Circle cartoon, but there was some profanity here. We can't use the whole one on this, Sandy, but we love Sandy Clark showing just how much of a big Gator hater Sandy Clark is. Appreciate that. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you can kind of see that. That's kind of funny stuff. Is there we have any more to show here? We'll show a couple more as well. All right, so that's all the ones for today. Really funny stuff. Hit me up on DawgNation Daily, and we'll share you as a part of our Gator Hater Roll Call. We appreciate everybody kind of getting in on that. We've got a fun show also today. Former Georgia quarterback David Green going to be here later on. We'll talk to him about a Florida win he had a chance to be a part of, as the Dogs took down the Gators in 2004. We'll ask him what it was like to play in that game later on in the show, and on Wednesdays over the last few weeks, we've been checking in with our buddy Mike Johnson from AT&T SEC Country Live. We'll do that here in a couple of minutes also. Before any of that, let me get back to the football field, though, and some of the stuff happening on the field. And, I thought that there was an interesting series of tweets the other day, and I kind of want to respond to this a little bit on DawgNation Daily. First of all, you had Derek Tyson, an analyst for ESPN.com, pointing out the numbers that Jake Fromm has put up thus far this season, and kind of made the statement of, isn't it interesting that Georgia can develop a young quarterback? In fact, let me show this to you right now. Here's what Derek Tyson tweets. If you're watching some video, you'll be able to see this. If not, I'll kind of read it to you. He says, true freshman quarterback Jake Fromm has 326 passing yards and 3 total touchdowns. Amazing how some teams are finding success with young quarterbacks. But then a Florida writer named Nick Delatorre comes back on this and says, yeah, but Georgia's passing offense is ranked dead last in the SEC at just 171.4 yards per game. And I think that series of tweets kind of speaks to an interesting sort of dichotomy that we've discussed in our program before, that I think some people misunderstand the nature of Georgia's offense. Jake Fromm, up to the Missouri game, wasn't passing very much, but not because he was incapable or not ready to take that next step. It's because Georgia didn't need him to. But on Saturday, Georgia needed a little more from Fromm, and he was more than equal to that task when called upon by Kirby Smart. In fact, when Smart spoke to the media yesterday, he talked about the balance that Georgia found in that game against Missouri.
we couldn't run the ball. I mean, when you can run and you can mix it up, the run opens the pass opens the run, and they complement each other. That's why every team in the country should want to have balance. Because if you're good at just one, it usually doesn't work out for you. Go look at the stats of the teams that lead the country in passing. They're not always the guys on top. And the teams that just lead the country in rushing, they're not always on top. So you want to have balance, and sometimes it's hard to do one before the other.
I think Kirby Smart's absolutely right there. On top in the country when it comes to passing yards this season, you see teams like Missouri. Y'all saw Missouri on Saturday. Is that who you want Georgia to be like? You don't want to be that imbalanced in the direction of throwing the football. And year after year, Georgia Tech is near the top of the country in terms of total rushing yards. But is Georgia Tech really the kind of program you want to pattern yourself after either? I don't think it is either. The best teams offensively are going to be balanced. And Georgia took a step on Saturday towards being balanced in its win versus Missouri. And that's why I think, even though Georgia was challenged a little more on Saturday from the Tigers than some people would have expected, I actually thought it was a big step forward for the team. It showed that it is capable of winning in more than just one way. And it showed that Jake Fromm is a quarterback who, as he sort of progresses through his freshman season, is seemingly getting better with each and every Saturday. The overall numbers may not be spectacular, but his leadership of the Georgia offense is everything the Dogs need right now. It is great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily today. Hope you enjoyed David Green a little later on. Let's check in with Mike Johnson right now. And I'll say hello to my partner here from AT&T SEC Country Live. We'll do the show at 3 p.m. Eastern Time every day on the AT&T, or I should say on the SEC Country Facebook page. It is Mike Johnson here on DawgNation Daily today. Mike, welcome back to our program. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. While the Georgia fans are experiencing a little bye week, I'm buying my cigars and getting ready for the third Saturday in October, that Alabama-Tennessee game.
That is right. We should explain that's one of those great traditions associated with that rivalry. Many people remember the picture from a couple years ago of Derrick Henry smoking the cigar in the locker room, arm in arm with Nick Saban after the game. So that's what you do, right? The winner of that game, and let's face it, has been Alabama for quite some time. You smoke the cigar. Is that the way that you celebrate that?
Absolutely, man. Light them up in the locker room. I was actually shamefully part of the last Alabama team that lost to Tennessee back in 2006. But we've strung together quite a couple victories and enjoyed quite a few cigars since then.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up. It's actually another rivalry that I want to talk to you about for a moment. That's the Alabama-Auburn rivalry, because you also were a part of, I guess, what, 2 losses to Auburn, and then a part of 2 wins against Auburn, and that essentially, didn't start a streak, because I guess Auburn won in 2010 and 2013, but it's certainly a series of dominance for Alabama in that series against Auburn. And I'm curious, leading into Saban's second year, where it kind of all changed, and Alabama beat Auburn for the first time, and I guess it was 6 straight games that Alabama had lost Auburn at that point in time. How much did Saban talk to y'all about that streak and wanting to end that? He's a master motivator, but is that motivation that he used there at that time? And the reason why I'm asking is because it leads us to a conversation about Georgia-Florida. But just for now, did Saban talk to you about the losing streak that Alabama had versus Auburn going into that game?
Oh, he absolutely did. His first year there in 2007, we were, having a rough patch. I think everybody in the locker room fully expected to win the game, actually, in 2007. We had gotten some suspended players back, and we hit the field, and we had lost 5 in a row and went in and lost that game in 2007. And it's interesting because that was Nick Saban's first taste of the rivalry, really. So I don't think he understood it. Throughout the week, he kind of explained it to us like, hey, guys, this rivalry means a lot to a lot of people in this state. And it was so funny because when you come back in 2008 and Nick Saban had tasted a little bit of loss on that side of the rivalry, it was almost like he was more irritated. He was like, hey, this game means a lot to everybody in this locker room now. This game, this is a big deal for this football team and for this university and for this athletic department. It was almost like getting a taste of that loss the year before to Tommy Tuberville and company really amped him up to try to go out on a ledge and really develop that team in a way to kind of put Auburn behind us. And we went out in 2008 and won 36-0 to put the streak to bed. And I think it's different for Kirby Smart. Obviously, he's been a part of that Florida-Georgia rivalry, so he understands that and maybe a little bit better than most people that are coming from the outside in. But I definitely think it's an interesting dynamic, and I think that you try to play into the player's psyche when you talk about these rivalry games. When you talk about cigar smoke, or when you talk about going down to Jacksonville to play that game and how big of a deal it is for the fan base, it's interesting. And, Brandon, you know this. I mean, there's just such a different aura on campus in these weeks. It's just like, it's such a bigger deal, and it's hard to explain, but fall is in the air. It's getting a little cooler outside. And there's just that extra level of energy at practice, and I know that Kirby will approach that when that game time comes.
And I think that's really interesting because I'm actually not completely sure, although I do agree with you that there is definitely a different kind of aura about a game like this. But sometimes I wonder, do coaches intentionally try to block some of that kind of stuff out? Because obviously if you make too much of a deal about the game, then you put your team in a position to maybe be a little too tight and not play the way they're supposed to. But there are so many ways in which Smart is similar to Saban, and having learned from Saban, it sounds like you think that if you were a player in this Georgia practice field this week or in this Georgia locker room leading into the game against Florida, you think Kirby Smart's probably talking a little bit about his own disappointment as a player getting beaten up by Steve Spurrier in this series, or the fact that 20 of the last 26 have gone the way of the Gators here. You think that Smart might actually be talking this up a little bit with his team this week, because it sounds like that's what Saban did about the Auburn losing streak.
I'm telling you right now, B, I have no doubt in my mind that I don't know what Kirby's going to say to the media. I don't know what he's going to say in his pressers, but behind those closed doors, I guarantee you he is pointing out to these players how big of a deal this game is, and how, 20, 30 years later, he remembers his game against Florida, and he remembers every single play, and he remembers every single tackle. I promise you he's telling those stories. It's something that I would do if I were in his shoes, and having heard Kirby Smart talk to these defenses he had at Alabama for so many years, I know that it's something that's coming off his tongue right now, because that's just the way it is. And I think as a player, really the toughest thing is trying to find a balance. Not trying to play too crazy. Don't do anything that you wouldn't normally do to any other team. Just find that extra level of emotion. And I definitely had issues in 2007. Was my first start against Auburn. And listen, man, I wanted to hit everything that had orange on. I was flying around the field, cut blocking, hitting people. I mean, I had to kind of restrain my emotions. And I know that Kirby Smart will tell them to do that, but I'm telling you, I promise you he's pointing to these guys and he's telling them stories back from when he was there. And he's probably telling them what his record was against Florida. And he's probably explaining to them that 20 and 30 years and 40 years from now, they're going to remember this game, and just to make sure they leave it all out on the field.
Well, it's one of those things, too. And, I think going into the Notre Dame game, when Georgia was not the point spread favorite, it seemed like the team almost kind of enjoyed feeling like an underdog. They sort of played against Notre Dame, the defense especially, like they had something to prove against the Fighting Irish that day, national attention, the heritage of the Notre Dame program. It almost kind of put the Georgia defense on edge a little bit going into that game. While Georgia's going to be a big favorite from a Vegas standpoint moving into the game against Florida, I guess there's an opportunity for Kirby Smart here to sort of paint the Georgia players, because they don't pay attention to the Vegas stuff necessarily. They don't know what the full media attention is. A lot of them may only know what Kirby Smart tells them, and Kirby Smart may be using that current streak that Florida has and the couple decades worth of dominance for the Gators. He may be able to use that as making this number 3 team in the country feel like it's an underdog going into this game, which is kind of a nice mindset if Georgia really could adopt that.
Yeah, if he can find a way to bend it that way, then it's a big deal. I'm telling you, one of the hardest things for college football programs to battle against is complacency. When you've had success, that's the biggest thing going against future success. And Nick Saban's obviously found a way to do that at Alabama. Kirby Smart knows how to do that. I'm sure that he's learned a few lessons and how to keep from having that complacency. But it's tough. You tend to battle. You tend to dig a lot harder when your back is against the wall. And I brought it up to you earlier in the year, I think when Georgia was playing App State. The mark of a winning program, the mark of a great head coach to me, is when they can go into weekends when they're favored by 30 or 35 or 40 points and put these other teams to bed and go out and do the things they need to and get to business and put these teams away and don't let these other teams think they have any chance. We have not seen Butch Jones do that at Tennessee, but we've seen the ability for Kirby Smart to be able to do that here in year 2 at Georgia. And I haven't seen anything that lets me know that trend won't continue against Florida. I think that he's going to treat this as a business trip, and he's going to try to get his players to do the same thing. In
our comment section on Facebook Live, Joy Page and Nate Thomas echoing kind of a similar sentiment. One of the phrases that Georgia's used this season is keep chopping wood, chop wood every day, and that's what these Georgia fans are asking for Georgia to do. And against Florida, that's exactly what the Dogs, I think, are going to try to do. Mike, let me ask you about last Saturday for a moment against Missouri. And the point that I've made about this game is, even though Missouri challenged Georgia in the first half more than most experts probably thought they would, and Georgia's pass defense gave up a couple big plays in the game. I actually thought for the team as a whole, it was kind of a step forward that day. Georgia kind of showed an ability to respond when challenged. Georgia showed an extra dimension of the offense that maybe some people didn't know that it had, and I feel sort of better about Georgia after the Missouri game, even though portions of it were closer than they were supposed to be. Is that a reasonable point of view in your mind?
Absolutely. I think when you look at what this Georgia team has been so far this year, I think this was a different game than they've had to win. I think that, you're going to ask at some point, you're going to ask Jake Fromm to go out and win a game with his arm, to throw for over 300 yards. You're going to have to ask the defense to step up in the second half and make some stops, and that's what we saw. Missouri's not a great football team, but we knew going in they would have a puncher's chance. The Drew Lock didn't have any problem unleashing the ball downfield and trying to let his wide receivers make plays, and you saw that in the first half. And I think the response from Georgia, like you were saying, was the step forward. It was Jake Fromm being able to go out and make some incredible throws in the second half. That wide receiver core, to me, continues to impress. And listen, the leverage that offensive line is playing with, specifically in the second half and allowing to rip off some of those runs they did, I thought was nothing short of impressive. You're not going to blow out every team along the way. You're not going to cover every spread. And sometimes it's the counterpunch that really shows you the hallmark of a great football team. And Georgia had that counterpunch on Saturday. Missouri's not great, but I think the way that Georgia really answered in the second half to me was a big thing to point to in terms of how this football team is building, its competitive streak going down the stretch of the schedule.
Let me ask you a logistical question for a moment. Georgia's in a bye week right now. Now, my understanding is that means the Thursday practice is going to be a little harder than the game week would normally be. Thursday going to be a little bit more like Tuesday and Wednesday, and I guess the team will then have Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. Is that kind of your understanding of how bye weeks typically work, and what is a bye week like if you are a player?
Yeah, bye weeks it can be a good time when you're a player, and I think every player looks forward to it. It's not just about getting time off or going home to see family, and I'm sure that there will be some Georgia players that do that. But Nick Saban used to always tell us that there were scientific studies that if you could get 3 days off in a row for your legs to get your legs back up under you were so much better in the end. And we used to do it to where we'd have an 8-week stretch before our bye week, so somewhere in the middle of that, he'd give us a couple of days off in a row. And then when you get to the bye week, you take those days to rest your legs. Now, it doesn't mean you go out and party. It doesn't mean you go out and drink. It doesn't mean you go out and do some crazy things. You probably stay around that locker room for the better part of that week, obviously, and get the practice. But be sure after these practices on the bye week, getting your legs back up under you, getting in the cold tub, making sure you're getting the correct workouts in, because this is kind of a time to not only look forward at what's coming up, but to reflect a little bit. Get in the film room, see about what you've done the first few weeks, kind of take a breather when you don't have to game plan and say, hey, you know what, I can do this better on the stretch run. I know we've had a good season so far, so let me make this adjustment for practice. Let me spend an extra 30 minutes in the cold tub this week. Let me do some extra things. It's just it's more mental in my mind, BA, than it is physical. There's definitely some physical aspects, but mentally being able to take that break and step away from what you've been grinding on, doing 7 days a week for the better part of a few months, and being able to look back, see what you've accomplished, but also see what your goals will be moving forward. I'm sure that's what the Georgia football team is doing this week.
And I would guess that if you're one of those players kind of, just on the fringe of being a starter, a guy that's been on the field but maybe not as much as you want, I mean, this can almost be a game week for you, right? Because it's a chance to maybe kind of move up a little bit on the depth chart in comparison to a starter who may be looking for that little bit of rest this week and may lose his edge a little bit. You got some games left this season that, if practice is supposed to be a competition, you could kind of go out there and win that competition this week and maybe put yourself in a better position to play against Florida, South Carolina, Auburn, and the rest of the schedule, right?
Well, it's not only starters losing their edge, but let's be honest, Kirby Smart's going to give some of these guys, upperclassmen, guys like Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel, aren't going to get as many carries this week, and I'm sure that's going to be spread all around the field. That some of these defensive linemen, some of the linebacking core, are probably going to be removed from some of these practice reps that they normally would have had during a game week, and that allows you some open competition for some of these backup spots, and for some of these guys to prove that, hey, not only do I have the physical ability, but I have the mental capacity to show up on a bye week and put the work in necessary that I want to be a bigger part of this team moving forward. And you see it every year. You saw it a couple of weeks ago with Butch Jones making the switch at quarterback up at Tennessee. These guys come in, and there is a shuffle-up. There is an opportunity to build depth at some of these positions, and I know that's what's going on at Georgia because I've seen Kirby do it. Hey, let's plug in these backup linebackers. Let's see how this guy's going to react when the ball starts flying around. Let's do some live drills between some of the second-string guys on some of these plays and goal line drills or live special teams and see how these guys react. And it'll be a big week for them moving forward. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, so Georgia, let's finish up with this. 13.5-point favorite, at least according to one Vegas sports book for the game against Florida. And I said before you joined us that shows you that, according to a lot of the experts, Florida's going to need some help to win this game. One of the things it's not apparently going to get some help from in terms of Georgia is on the injury front. Kirby Smart said Terry Godwin looks fine, the wide receiver. Trent Thompson, the defensive tackle, he's back practicing again. But when you look at Florida, play devil's advocate for a moment, because there are a lot of Georgia fans who think that this game is just going to be easy, and maybe it will be. I mean, I have to admit, when I look on paper, I see a Georgia team that looks way better than Florida does. But if you were to play devil's advocate and say, hey, Georgia fans, watch out from this for Florida, is there anything about Florida that scares you right now or should scare an opponent at the moment?
Well, I think, first of all, when you talk about it logistically, when you're lining up X's and O's and game planning, I don't think that you have an opportunity. I don't think you see an avenue for Florida to really take over this game and win at any point. But there are not just, it's not just offense versus defense, and it's not just one play after another, and it's not just one run game against the defensive line. I think that what you're looking for, if you're a Georgia fan, is, first of all, no turnovers. You don't want any fumbles. You don't want any interceptions, because obviously Florida has shown the ability to take those interceptions to the house. You also don't want them to create any magic on special teams. For all of Florida's flaws, they still have a ton of athleticism, and that's going to show on the special team side of the ball and some of these punt returns, kickoff returns. That's another way for Florida to get back in the game. I think you have to be careful in the secondary that maybe Jim McElwain sees some things from last week that Missouri did. That wide receiver core is very deep down in Florida, and Felipe Franks, for all his shortcomings, has shown the ability to get the ball downfield as well this year. And so I think that's kind of the avenue you'd look at. Find a way for Florida, if you're Jim McElwain, to create some magic out of the wildcat position, try to beat Georgia's secondary over the top, and then find some turnovers in there. And that will be the path to victory if Florida is able to keep this thing close. But if Georgia keeps doing the same things they've been doing and playing kind of ball control and allowing these running backs to run wild and the offensive line playing as well as they have, there's not, and there shouldn't be a path to victory for Florida this next weekend.
All right, Mike, 3 p.m. Eastern Time today on the SEC Country Facebook page. We look forward to seeing you for AT&T SEC Country Live. Have a good day.
Should be a good one, brother. See you later.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really good stuff there from Mike Johnson. Yeah, even as a 13.5-point favorite, I mean, Florida still has some things that can do. He referenced the wide receiver core, and while I don't think that this receiver core for Florida, assuming that Tyree Cleveland isn't healthy, I wouldn't put that in the same group as Missouri right now. But if Cleveland's healthy and playing, I know he tried to give it a go a little bit on Saturday against Texas A&M. That's obviously a group that you have to respect. The one thing about Florida you probably do have to respect is also that quarterback Frank's not a good player necessarily, but a big arm, the kind of guy that can certainly throw the ball deep down the field. We'll see if anybody's there to catch it, and we'll see how Georgia defends it next Saturday. Let me do our SEC through here for right now. And by the way, speaking of bets and point spreads and everything else, when you start thinking about some college football action, you want to get your own bets down in the games, you want to be a winner. And when you do win, you want the fast, no-hassle payout. That's why you want to trust my friends at MyBookie, because that's what MyBookie's known for. Fast, no-hassle payout when you win. But right now, for DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers, they have an even better offer for you than that. You can get your first deposit matched right now up to 100%. But you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. That's dog, spelled the way it's supposed to be, D-A-W-G, DawgNation. Website, mybookie.ag. So check out mybookie.ag. Use the promo code DawgNation. You get your first deposit matched up to 100%. You play, you win. You get paid. It's as simple as that with my friends at MyBookie, mybookie.ag, promo code DawgNation. All right, big story from the SEC yesterday was a story that brings back a name a lot of Georgia fans remember from the recruiting trail. Former 4-star wide receiver Kyle Davis, who at one point in time, going into the class of 2016, Georgia thought it was going to get. Davis had a commitment announcement scheduled, and on that day, he was going to say Georgia. That commitment announcement got postponed. After that, Auburn kind of got back in the mix, and Auburn got Davis's services. But he never really materialized for Auburn, did not play during spring practice last year, and has been dismissed from the team now, as made official by Gus Malzahn yesterday, for a violation of team rules. You know, the story here is not so much about Davis as it is all the players that Auburn has lost recently. Byron Cowart, he's gone from the team. Antoine Jackson, he's gone from the team. Sean White's gone from the team. Woody Barrett's gone from the team. John Franklin III's gone from the team. You know, you've sort of reduced a lot of names from this Auburn roster as of late. I think all of this together kind of adds to just kind of a bad PR situation for Gus Malzahn. coming off the heels of a loss to LSU. You never want that coupled with another bad story. Now, Davis's absence on the field is no big loss for Auburn, frankly, because he wasn't that big of a contributor. But anytime you subtract like a half dozen people off your roster, which is essentially what Auburn has done as of late, it puts you at a bit of a disadvantage. And right now, Auburn, in terms of the guys that it can't seem to keep in its program, is in a bit of a disadvantage. By the way, speaking of embattled coaches, Malzahn may be one. A few more kind of put on notice by the Associated Press. And maybe you have to be in media to sort of appreciate this. Maybe this is kind of an inside thing here, but you know the world has been taken over by hot takes when even the Associated Press is now kind of putting its own hot seat list ranking out. I mean, didn't the AP used to be sort of the bastion of neutrality and the bastion of objectivity and, frankly, kind of boring coverage? And even they've got like a hot seat watch list now. Well, on that list, a lot of SEC names. Butch Jones, his seat thought to be scorching right now. Brett Bielema gets mentioned by Ralph Russo, the AP writer. Barry Odom, the Missouri coach. He's on this list. Jim McElwain kind of getting some discussion here. Russo, the AP writer, says that Kevin Sumlin kind of cooling off here after the win against Florida and some other things for him there. But just sort of speaks to kind of where things are in the SEC at this moment that, on a list of hot seat coaches, you have like 5 different SEC names that you have to talk about. And it sort of shows you the state of college football media, that it's all been sensationalized, and even the Associated Press is kind of doing its own hot seat rankings. I do think it's interesting, though, that you can go through 5 names in the SEC who are potentially on the hot seat and not actually get to all the guys who are feeling the pressure from fan bases. Because the one guy that Ralph Russo from the Associated Press did not name at all was Auburn coach Gus Malzahn. But when Malzahn met with the media yesterday, in addition to announcing the Davis dismissal, he also fielded questions about his own job status. He said he's not worried about that right now. He's only concerned about the game against Arkansas. But this does speak to just how tumultuous, is that the word? Probably a bigger word than I should be using, but how tumultuous the situation is in the SEC at the moment. On the one hand, you've got a guy that at once looked like he was competing for the SEC crown, still not out of it in the SEC West, and after essentially one conference loss, already kind of on the fence about what his future there is with the program. So kind of interesting times there. We'll make that your SEC through. And we'll get ready to transition and welcome in David Green, the former Georgia quarterback, here to DawgNation Daily. Looking forward to talking to him about the game against Florida, and also we'll look ahead to the next home game when there'll be another big autograph signing taking place at Tailgate Apparel right there in the old Harry Bissett's building in Athens, 279 East Broad Street. Speaking of David, let's welcome him in right now. David, good morning. Thanks for your time today. How you doing?
Doing good, Brandon. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well. And as I said, I want to talk to you about the Florida game in just a moment. Let me look back here before we get to that, though. And, Kirby Smart described Jake Fromm, the quarterback for the Dogs, a position you obviously know well. Says he grew up on Saturday. Georgia offense may have grown up a little bit. Was that your perspective on it as well, that Fromm, who I think has been really impressive in his freshman season, became even more impressive after really kind of airing it out a little bit on Saturday?
Yeah, I tell you, he really has been impressive this entire season. The one thing that you typically see with guys that play as true freshmen is they start getting exhausted this time of year, or they at least have, 1 or 2 games where they just can completely flop and just lose it. We're fortunate. I know we still got a lot of ball to play. Fortunately for us, he hasn't done that. I mean, he's done a great job of making big plays when we've needed them. When defense kind of sputtered around and Missouri hit some big plays on Saturday, and he just took it right back down the field. And he's playing with so much confidence. The Brandon Ott thing is, he stepped in week 1, right, with that injury, and he's been confident the entire time he's been out there. It's pretty remarkable to watch. Yeah, no, it really has been remarkable to watch, and I guess, unfortunately, one of the guys that's been put in a position to watch because of his injury and because of the rise of Fromm is Jacob Eason. Now, Kirby Smart was asked about Eason yesterday not getting the game against Missouri and essentially kind of deflected the question. That's not a subject he wants to talk about right now, which, David, to me indicates that the quarterback situation for the moment is settled. Fromm is the guy. He's going to play all the meaningful snaps, and on Saturday, all the snaps also. Moving into Florida after the bye week and for the rest of the season, it seems like the quarterback discussion is not one that Kirby Smart wants to have anymore, right? No, and I don't think it's really one that even needs to take place. I think at this point, Fromm has earned the right to stay in. And really at this point until, Fromm either his production goes down dramatically or he gets injured, he really shouldn't be coming out of the game. And, And so that's the one thing about it. You can only ask for the opportunity. And, of course, Fromm didn't want to go in under the circumstances he went in. But when you get your chance to play, he's taken advantage of it. And the kid has been nothing but positive. You can tell from the moment he got in there. I mean, he's all about the team. He's putting the team first. He's all about Georgia. I mean, what more as fans could we want from our quarterback than, somebody who's just absolutely bought in, bought into the team.
So I was, David, in Jacksonville in 2004 to watch your team get the win over Florida, and that ended for Georgia a long losing streak to the Gators. Had lost every game dating back to 1997. The 97 win, it also kind of ended a long losing streak that had gone on for many years as well. As the quarterback of the team that got that win over Florida, and you and I would both agree Georgia should have gotten more of these over the years than it got. That's sort of a separate conversation for a different day. But what was it like being the quarterback in getting that win against Florida in Jacksonville? Did you feel the weight of those past years on you that day? And when you look back on your career, where do you rank a win over Florida in terms of what you're able to do in a Georgia uniform?
Well, I would say this. That win my senior year, it was probably just more of satisfaction than anything. There's no question we probably should have beat them in years prior to that, and obviously it cost us a chance at playing in the national championship game in 2002. It's a unique game. It's one of those ones that's fun to play. The atmosphere is crazy. I remember coming into those games, and we had played so bad down there for so long. I think we actually ran into it, Brandon, where we just wanted it so bad that a lot of times we had just a hard time either getting into the flow of the game or getting into the rhythm of the game. And we had a few opportunities to make plays. We didn't make them. It had nothing to do with us, not wanting it bad enough or being, lazy. It's just our execution was off on those days, and you can't afford to have that. In football, you only get so many shots, and you got to make each weekend count. And that's why, regardless of your opponent, you got to show up week in and week out. And Florida, even the years that they're down a little bit, they normally have plenty of good athletes that can beat you if you're not on your A game.
By the way, in our comment section, Lorraine McGee watching us, remembering that big throw you made to Fred Gibson, which really was the difference in that game. It's probably nice, David, to have folks still remembering moments like that for you, and it's one of the reasons why we enjoy having you here on DawgNation Daily, because of the memories that so many of us have from those games, including that big throw to Gibson back in 2004.
Oh, it was fun. And, look, that was a game. As players, we always said we don't circle games on our calendar. I can promise you, going into my senior year, I had that game circled about 4 or 5 different times. I wanted that game so bad, and so did everybody else on our team. And because we knew that we were good enough and we should have won in the past, in previous years, and we didn't take care of business. It was satisfying to know we came out, we played well. I don't remember the final score. I remember Leonard Pope had a huge game. I think he had 3 touchdown catches that game. And it was nice. I think they started coming back a little bit, and when Fred caught that little seam post, I think that iced it.
So let me ask you a quick final question then. We talked to Mike Johnson about this a moment ago, and Mike played for Nick Saban at Alabama, and we were talking about mentally how you approach this game for Georgia next Saturday, because it's kind of the same thing. Now, it's not quite as long a losing streak for Georgia moving into the 2017 game, but it is a streak, and obviously, the last 26 years factor into this as well. If you're Kirby Smart, do you talk about the past? Do you reference, good teams that have left Jacksonville frustrated? You want to be different than that? If you're the coach of Georgia moving into this game, how do you talk about the game?
No, well, I think you just treat it like any other game. You obviously you admit that the atmosphere is going to be different, because it is. Just like the SEC championship game, it has a different feel, and you're fooling yourself if you think it doesn't, because you can definitely feel it. I don't know, if I'm a coach, the one thing I want from my players, I want them thinking about the things that they can control. They can't worry about the years that I lost at Georgia. We came home with our tails tucked between our legs. They had nothing to do with that. They need to be extra zoomed in, as I like to call it, just zoomed in on their assignment. They're there to play a football game, and a team that executes the best, that performs the best, doesn't kill themselves, will end up winning. And we've certainly got the team and the talent to go down there and take care of business this year. They just got to go out and play the kind of ball with the same mindset they have, at the beginning of this season.
All right, David, it's still a couple weeks away from the next home game for Georgia, but when it comes around, I know there'll be big things going on at Tailgate Apparel right there in Athens. It's the old Harry Bissett's building. I know you had a great time there last Saturday, and in a couple of weeks, or I guess it's, still 3 weeks away, but in a few weeks, being back in Athens, Tailgate Apparel is going to be a great spot to be, right?
It's going to be a good spot. We don't have the exact time yet, but Lindsey Scott's going to be doing a signing.
Really? That'll be fun.
And so, yeah, you talk about a fun one. We've last week we had Coach Dooley, and I did a little signing with Coach as well. It was good to see him.
Yeah.
I told him, I said, Coach, you need to bring Barb because, she's a trip now. She will
no
light
doubt.
up the place. There's no question. But then, so Lindsey Scott's coming, and, of course, all the Dog fans know he's part of one of the greatest calls and one of the greatest plays in Georgia history. And so, so hopefully we can get us a big win against Florida, and then we'll have Lindsey Scott doing a signing there the following week.
That sounds like a plan, David. Thanks for your time. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
All right, Brandon. Thank you, buddy.
Good stuff there from David Green. I always appreciate his ability to kind of reminisce back on a phenomenal career for him in a Georgia uniform, and really interesting insight from him about how to approach the Florida game next Saturday. I'm not quite sure that there is a perfectly right approach. I thought you heard kind of two different descriptions from both Mike Johnson and David Green on today's show. I imagine we may look at this some more tomorrow about two very different ways to kind of go about the same objective and goal, which is to crush the Gators in 2 Saturdays. Really interesting stuff. By the way, to close out our show today here as well, I thought that Thomas Davis did a good job representing Georgia on the SEC Network a little earlier this week. You may have seen the sign on Saturday at the SEC Nation broadcast from Athens where the fan held up and said, "We," and there was parentheses, "kind of want Alabama." And listen, I get where the fan was coming from. It's kind of a funny sign. But Davis said, "Hey, that's not the right approach at all. We definitely want Alabama. We're not afraid of them." And right now, I don't think Georgia should be afraid of anybody either. We'll see tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily. And for those of you who are with us on video right now, we appreciate your time. You want to weigh in on anything from today's show, we'll give you a chance to do that. I love what Stacey Dean says. We owe the Gators big time. Stacey, that's absolutely true. I like Ray Duke and Scott Harris reminding us of the 1980 Larry Munson call against Florida, going right through a chair, a metal steel chair, as Munson so descriptively called that one that day. Mike Italia says, "BA, can someone explain what the problem with Roundtree is? Has his football career come to a close at UGA?" I guess there was the Instagram post from Roundtree this week where he said something to the effect of one door closes, another door opens. I know that it's been reported many times by Kirby Smart that, Roundtree's still dealing with injuries. I also know that from a football player profile standpoint, Roundtree, while he's a really, was a highly regarded prospect coming out of high school, he's almost seemingly, when he's been healthy enough to play for Georgia, been a little bit too small to play linebacker and maybe not quite as quick as you want your defensive backs to be. He has really kind of been a tweener at Georgia, sort of stuck between those two position groups, and that happens from time to time. I've always felt like Roundtree would be a perfect linebacker for one of these Big 12 teams. I'm not telling you that's where he'll go. I wouldn't even begin to guess where Roundtree may actually go if his Georgia career is coming to an end. But he always has felt like a better linebacker for a team that, and I think he could play linebacker for a team like this, for a team that plays in some league that's just stopping the spread all the time. Like the American Athletic Conference is like this too. You've got, all those spread coaches, Philip Montgomery at Tulsa, Chad Morris at SMU, on and on you could go with these spread teams. Like a linebacker to stop the spread sort of feels like what Roundtree might be really good at. Unfortunately, that's just not the profile of SEC linebackers. SEC linebackers are getting bigger. In some respects, defensive backs are kind of a little smaller, at least in terms of their weight. They're getting taller and thinner. They're running more like cornerbacks now. And one of the ways that at least on the best teams, that's true. And one of the ways that becomes possible is because the linebackers are getting, more physical. They're run stoppers. And, putting a Roundtree on that, linebacking core for a while, that was always going to be a tough spot for him to find a place to go, find a home there. And the only reason that was tried is because he wasn't quite working out at safety either. I think he's a really good athlete that may just not be the right physical fit for what Georgia's trying to do. Brian Murphy asked, how's the Florida defense? Will we be able to run on them? So the one place where Florida's defense is pretty good is on that defensive line. And I think we've talked about this the last couple of days. So there's some depth there. That's the one spot where they have hit on a few recruits. For the most part, Florida under McElwain has not been good recruiting. But overall, the defensive line recruiting, either you've hit on some guys there or you've just brought in some numbers there. But the Florida defensive line is still pretty deep. You hear mixed things with the linebackers. Some guys like that group. Some guys not so much. Randy Ray Compton says, this is our statement week. The environment being different and still playing with smart emotions. B.A., what's your score prediction for Gainesville? Oh, I think he means Jacksonville. I'm not quite ready to make a score prediction on this yet. I'm not probably quite ready to go there on that yet, but obviously I'm very confident that Georgia wins the game. The 2-touchdown margin, that seems to be about right. That seems to be about what Georgia might be able to do. I'm not quite ready to do that yet. Randy Jackson asking about what's going on with Richard LeCount. What's up with him? What's the story there? We talked to Seth Emerson about that last week. Seth will be back with us again tomorrow, by the way. And the point that Seth said about LeCount is that he's not in the doghouse. He's not, I think, underwhelming as a freshman. It's just that J.R. Reed has stepped up and played so well for Georgia that the space that you thought LeCount might be able to occupy has really been kind of overwhelmed by J.R. Reed. This is not a negative about LeCount. It's more of a positive when it comes to Reed there at the safety position. And I think that's one of the reasons why you haven't seen LeCount showing up in the stats sheet quite as much, although he has been playing. And remember, even if that time on the field for LeCount this year doesn't lead to big stats for this year, I think it puts him in a better position to be a all-SEC type performer maybe next year or his junior season. The same thing's probably true for D'Angelo Gibbs as well, although Gibbs, I guess, has played a good bit less. Stacey Dean says our defense is going to have to win this game for us. We must stop the run, period. For the last 2 seasons, we could not stop the run. It is amazing how many average Florida teams have run the ball against Georgia. The worst of the worst to me is that 2014 game. One of the worst memories I think that any Georgia fan could ever have. The 2014 game against Florida is almost worse than the Fatone-Bata game of 2015, and that's saying something. There's been a lot of bad Georgia-Florida games. My gosh. But the 2014 was just awful because Georgia was much better than Florida. I mean much better than Florida. And Florida just out-physical Georgia the whole way. Does anybody see that happening this year, though? I mean, is Kirby Smart going to let this team get pushed around on either side of the ball? I mean, there has been so much said and seemingly done to make Georgia the kind of team that sort of pushes its weight around. It makes Georgia the kind of team that dictates the pace and the style of play for a game. I cannot see what happened to Georgia in 2014 happening to this Georgia team right now. And it's not because Georgia's impervious to being challenged. They're not. Florida may challenge Georgia on Saturday or 2 Saturdays from now. But it's not going to be because Georgia doesn't match what Florida brings to the table physically. It's just not. Some of those Georgia teams in the past were more than capable, unfortunately, of having that befall them. I just don't see that for this Georgia team. Darren Stinchcomb says I'd make Franks beat me. I think that's probably a pretty good idea because I don't think that he's a good enough quarterback to do that necessarily. He does have a big arm, and Florida does have, assuming that Tyree Cleveland is healthy, it has some capable weapons there. But yeah, I mean, putting the ball in Felipe Frank's hands, I don't think you have much reason to be scared about that. Michael Morrow, by the way, our buddy Mad Dog on Twitter, MadDog19, who gave us the world, the biggest loser meme. We appreciate Mike sharing that with us. Jerry Lewis says, I think we'll start a little slow, which we've done, but then start chopping wood and beat them down. Jerry, I think that you may be right about that. I think that it may be one of those things where, and y'all know I'm going to be a basket of nerves next week, but it may be one of those things where that first quarter is a tense first quarter. Because, I mean, Kirby Smart told you on Saturday night what his viewpoint going into every game is. And he's been saying this over and over. They want to try to make a team quit. And they're going to run the ball. And if it ain't working, they're sticking with it because he said it's hard to run the SEC. It's sort of like, for those of you that ever go to casinos, you play blackjack, you may sit down there. You may start the series off on a cold streak. You may be losing a bunch. But if you walk away from the table then, you're just nothing but a loser. And it's the same thing for running the football. You may hand the ball off. You may not go anywhere for a while. But if you abandon the run, then that means you've just surrendered the run. That's not a recipe for winning the SEC. I think Jerry's right about this. If Georgia tries to run early against a Florida defensive line, that's probably pretty good, and it's not going anywhere early, Georgia's not abandoning that. They're going to stick with it. And that may lead to a first quarter, a second quarter that closer than it's supposed to be. Florida hanging around. Their crowd starting to make a little noise. Well, at that point, as Jerry also said, Georgia's going to keep chopping wood and eventually break through. That may be the view. That may be the way this game unfolds. J. Scott Williams says, I'm honestly more worried about Kentucky than I am Florida at this point. Go Dogs. I mean, I get where you're coming from on that, and I've been very confident about this game all year long. I don't know, y'all. I'll just be glad when it's over. Armand Rashad says, BA, this is going to look like the Missouri game. There's no need to worry. So here's the thing. I'm going to have to take y'all's word for this because I tried to, sort of say, hey, be careful with Tennessee, be careful with Tennessee, be careful with Tennessee. It was 41-0. So there's an element of, maybe hey, watch out, respect your opponent. Maybe that doesn't apply here. Maybe that is indeed the case. I'm going to let y'all kind of lead the way on some of that kind of stuff. Christopher Smith says, are you concerned about Georgia's 2018 class of defensive back or lack thereof? Christopher, I think if you're a guy that wants defensive backs at Georgia for the class of 2018, I think you may have a lot of fun here over the course of the next few weeks. I think there are some very big names who are giving Georgia a lot of attention here, and you're going to hear more about it. One of them may be the current Miami commit, Gilbert Frierson. One of them may be the 5-star from American Heritage Plantation, the same school that Sony Michel and Isaiah McKenzie and Marshall Morgan went to. Tyson Campbell. You already probably know about Tyreek Johnson, who I think is a strong I don't know if Georgia leans the right word here, although if I was doing a projected class, I would have Tyreek in it. If you want to hear big-name defensive backs talking about Georgia, you're going to be hearing about that, I believe, very, very soon, and you may hear a lot about that. I actually think when this class is finally done, I'm guessing that defensive back is going to be one of the places where Georgia really makes a lot of noise. Now, it may end up being all the positions, but Georgia needs defensive backs. I'm talking about true, honest-to-goodness cornerbacks, and they may get a few here for this class of 2018, so I think it's going to be fun. Lorraine McGee says, does Tennessee score against Alabama this week? Boy, that's a good question. Couldn't score against South Carolina last week. Hasn't scored a touchdown in 3 games, is that right? They may not. They may not cross because, A, they don't seem to want to give the ball to John Kelly when they're near the goal line. Now, they may not get into the red zone against Alabama, so that may be a moot point. But, Tennessee's play calling in the red zone is horrendous. Horrendous. I think that Butch Jones is probably almost definitely getting fired immediately after this game, if not Sunday. I don't think he does his weekly press conference next week. I don't think you wanted to fire him moving into the Alabama game because that's not fair to your interim coach, whoever ends up being. It may be Bob Shoop. That just wouldn't be fair to him. But I think after the Alabama game, you have very little reason to keep Butch Jones around at that point because I think the early signing period changes this. Tennessee's already losing its recruits. I mean, it's going to have a hard time holding onto the staff because people believe that Jones is already gone. So by starting the conversation of the next coach at Tennessee, I think that gives you a chance to kind of build something in place so that you can sign some kids come December. Now, Georgia obviously doesn't want to see Tennessee do that, but by firing Jones during the season, I'm not the kind of guy that just sort of goes around calling for people's jobs. I mean, that's not a very nice position to be in. But the reality is that early signing period means that by December the 20th, and really well before that, you've got to have your situation figured out. And Tennessee's situation, I do not believe, involves Butch Jones anymore. William Michael Wilkes on that same subject. Yeah, I believe that Butch is gone after the weekend. Jason Hoyer says, what's top 4 playoff teams? I'm looking forward to October the 31st when the first playoff ranking comes out. Right now, I would have the 2 teams in the SEC. I'd have Georgia. I'd have Alabama. Who else would I have? That's a good question. Probably still have Clemson, even though they lost on Friday night. And would probably have... I guess you'd have to put Penn State for now, although I'm not quite so sure that Ohio State and Penn State play the same day that Georgia plays Florida. Wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State won that game. I mean, I think the 4 best teams in the country right now may be Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State. Am I leaving out an obvious name here? That's about the 4 that I think. Did I leave anybody out? I think that's kind of the obvious. Those are my names. Neil Landon Jackson says, what about Wisconsin? I know Wisconsin's on the rise here, but I don't view the Big Ten West the same way I view the Big Ten East. I look at Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, all those teams as better than the Big Ten West teams. And, yeah, I mean, I think that Wisconsin got a chance to put a really gaudy record together by the end of the season, and they could win a head-to-head game against one of these Big Ten teams. But, Urban Meyer and James Franklin have gotten SEC-caliber players on their roster. Michigan has kind of come down to the South. It's gotten an Aubrey Solomon. It went to New Jersey and got, some players that, SEC caliber, even though they're not from the South. The Wisconsin players are still, for the most part, these Midwestern kids. And That's not a national championship team to me. You know, national championship teams to me are the ones that do SEC-style recruiting, and that's really Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. I know Michigan lost to Michigan State the other day and struggled with Indiana, but I'll really put all three of those teams ahead of Wisconsin. Armand Rashad says he's got UGA, Bama, Penn State, either TCU or Wisconsin. Yeah, I mean, I guess you got to respect TCU here a little bit, but TCU is also kind of the thing of, once again, you know, you look at the recruiting rankings of these Big 12 teams. These are not top 10 teams. Even Oklahoma, for the most part, is struggling to put top 10 teams together every single year. There's a lot of 3-star kids playing on these Big 12 teams. You know, Georgia beat TCU in the bowl game last year. I'm assuming if they played again, Georgia would win that game as well. Once again, you know, if I'm going outside the SEC, I've got way more respect for even a one-loss Clemson team than I do TCU, and I really think that all three of those Big Ten teams, you know, I like them better because they've got more of the kind of elite players, elite prospects that the championship teams seem to be kind of built around. Julie Craig says Georgia Tech could be a tough game this year. That's probably true. Georgia Tech has certainly played everybody it's played so far tough this season. Danny Smith says Clemson's overrated, plus their quarterback's injured. Backup quarterback can't save them. That is fair. As long as what's his name, Kelly Bryant. As long as Bryant is hurt, Clemson's not at its best. But if he's there, I mean, I actually was surprised that Bryant won the job when he did. Are we running late here? Yeah, we got to get ready to go here. I was actually surprised that Bryant won the job. I thought Hunter Johnson may win that job coming out of camp, but whoever commented is right that that Zarek Cooper and Hunter Johnson are nowhere near as good as Kelly Bryant. That's an offensive step back for the Tigers if Bryant's not in there. But that Clemson defense is still pretty good, although certainly Syracuse was able to move the football against them on Saturday, or I should say Friday night. Shane Guy says, well, I'll be sipping that Dixie vodka to settle myself before the game. Yes, Shane, I may have to. I absolutely may have to. All right, so we got to go. We're late. We'll be back 10 a.m. tomorrow for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live, 3 p.m. Eastern Time today on the SEC Country Facebook page for AT&T SEC Country Live. If you missed a portion of our broadcast, it'll be up there for you on iTunes. We'll post the show in a moment at the world-famous DawgNation.com. My wife's coming back home today. I'm so glad about that because it has been a rough last couple days for me, so I'm ready to get things back to normal. But we appreciate you being with us here today for DawgNation Daily, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Y'all have a great day.